The evening sky over the little European town glowed softly as people began arriving at the grand concert hall. The building stood tall, its wide doors opening to welcome guests dressed in suits, gowns, and sparkling jewelry. Inside, the air smelled of polished wood and fresh flowers placed near the piano. Every seat was taken long before the show began because tonight, a famous pianist named Ethan Caldwell was performing. For music lovers, it was a night they had been waiting for weeks. Behind the scenes, away from the noise and excitement, a woman named Clara quietly moved through the corridors. She wasn't a guest or a musician. She was one of the cleaners who worked there almost every evening. Her uniform was simple and a little worn out, and her shoes squeaked softly against the marble floor. As she dusted the corners and arranged empty chairs, she hummed a faint tune to herself. No one really noticed her. Most people rarely did. Clara had worked in that hall for years. Every evening after finishing her duties, she would pause near the big piano on stage. When no one was watching, she'd touch the keys gently, pressing them one by one like someone greeting old friends. She had no training, no teacher, and no lessons. Yet every note she touched carried a sense of feeling, as if her heart knew what her hands were trying to say. Tonight, as the crowd settled and the lights dimmed, Clara stood at the far end of the hall near the side door, watching quietly. She had no ticket, but the manager allowed her to stand there because she never caused any trouble. The piano sat at the center of the stage, shining under golden light. Ethan Caldwell walked out in a crisp black suit, his face calm but confident. The applause roared through the room. He bowed with grace, adjusted the bench, and placed his hands over the keys. The hall fell silent, and then music filled the air, smooth, rich, and alive. Every note seemed to dance around the audience. Clara stood still, her eyes wide, her heart moving with every melody. She had heard recordings before, but hearing it live was something else entirely. She could feel the emotion in her chest, like the music was speaking directly to her soul. For an hour, Ethan played piece after piece. Some were soft and slow, others fast and stormy. His fingers moved like they were born to belong there. People sat in awe, whispering words of praise. When he finally stopped, the room burst into loud applause. Everyone stood up, clapping and cheering for the man who had given them such a beautiful performance. After a few minutes, Ethan smiled and leaned closer to the microphone placed near the piano. "Thank you, everyone," he said warmly. "You've been a wonderful audience." The cheers grew even louder. Then, in a playful tone, he added, "Now I think we've had enough of me for one night. Is there anyone here brave enough to try playing something?" The crowd laughed. It was clearly meant as a joke. Everyone knew that no one from the audience could possibly match his level. A few people shouted teasing comments like, "Not after you, maestro," and "We'll embarrass ourselves." Ethan laughed along with them, enjoying the fun. But then something unexpected happened. From near the back of the hall, a small voice said, "I'll try." The laughter stopped for a moment. People turned to see who had spoken. It was Clara. She looked nervous but stood with quiet determination. Her uniform stood out among the elegant dresses and suits. Ethan blinked, surprised, but kept smiling. "Ah, we have a volunteer," he said, half amused. "Come on up." The audience began to whisper. Some chuckled under their breath, others looked confused. Clara slowly walked toward the stage. She wasn't walking to impress anyone. She just felt something inside her pushing her forward. Her hands trembled slightly as she climbed the small steps. Ethan gestured toward the piano seat. "Have a go," he said lightly, his tone still playful. "Let's see what you've got." A few people laughed softly again. The hall that had been filled with respect and admiration moments ago now carried a mix of curiosity and doubt. Clara sat down on the bench carefully, as though afraid to disturb the instrument. Her fingers hovered above the keys, and for a moment she didn't move. Ethan folded his arms and waited, still smiling. "Anytime you're ready," he said jokingly. Clara took a deep breath. The room seemed to fade away for her, the whispers, the stares, even the famous pianist beside her. She looked at the piano and remembered the times she had stood in the shadows, listening, dreaming. Then her fingers began to move. The first few notes were soft, barely above a whisper, but then something changed. The sound deepened, flowing smoothly through the hall. It wasn't perfect, but it was full of emotion. Her hands found their rhythm naturally, as though the music was already inside her, waiting to be freed. The audience quieted down. The laughter stopped. Ethan's smile slowly faded, replaced by a look of surprise. The woman they had thought would play a few random keys was suddenly creating something that sounded real, something that spoke. Her melody was simple but pure, carrying warmth, sadness, and beauty all at once. People leaned forward in their seats, their faces softening. A few even exchanged looks of disbelief. The sound grew stronger and the room was filled with an unexpected kind of magic. Clara didn't look up once. She didn't need to. She was lost in the moment, her body moving slightly with the rhythm, her eyes closed. Ethan took a small step closer, trying to understand what he was hearing. The notes weren't from any well-known song or classical piece. It was something original, something personal. There was a rawness in her playing that he hadn't heard in years, even among trained musicians. When she finally played the last note, her hands rested gently on the keys for a second longer. Then she looked up, blinking as though waking from a dream. The silence that followed was heavy. For a few seconds, no one moved or spoke. And then the applause came. It started from the back of the hall, one pair of hands clapping slowly, then another. Within seconds, the whole room was filled with loud clapping, cheers, and even shouts of encouragement. Clara looked around, confused, unsure if they were laughing again or truly clapping for her. But then she saw the faces. People were smiling, some even wiping their eyes. Ethan stood still beside her, his expression soft but thoughtful. He hadn't expected this. His joke had turned into something powerful, something real. When the applause finally died down, he gently put a hand on her shoulder and said quietly, "That was unexpected." Clara smiled shyly, unsure how to respond. She stood up and gave a small bow. "I just played what I remembered," she said simply. Ethan looked at her, still processing what had just happened. He wanted to ask where she had learned to play like that, but she had already stepped back, almost embarrassed by all the attention. As she made her way down the steps and back to her corner near the side door, people kept turning to look at her. Some clapped again as she passed. Others whispered in amazement. No one saw her as the cleaner anymore, not in that moment. She was the woman who had moved their hearts with her hands. Ethan returned to the microphone, still a bit shaken. "Well," he said with a faint laugh, "I think I just met someone who might have stolen my show tonight." The audience laughed warmly this time, not mockingly, but in agreement. Clara smiled to herself as she stood near the exit. She didn't think she had done anything special. She only played because the music had always lived quietly inside her, waiting for a moment to be heard. When the concert ended and the crowd began to leave, several people came up to her, asking who she was and where she had learned to play like that. Clara just shook her head and said softly, "Nowhere. I just play what I feel." Outside, the night air was cool and the streetlights glowed faintly. Clara walked home slowly, the sound of the piano still echoing in her mind. For her, it wasn't about applause or attention. It was about finally letting her heart speak out loud. And though she didn't know it yet, that small, brave moment, the one she thought was just a bit of music in the middle of a grand night, was about to change her life forever. When the concert ended that night, the sound of applause still echoed in everyone's ears. People slowly left the hall, talking about the performance they had just seen. But surprisingly, most of them were not talking about the famous pianist anymore. They were talking about the woman in the cleaner's uniform who had walked up to the stage and played like she had been born for it. Some called her brave, some called her gifted, and a few simply said they had never heard something so full of emotion. Ethan stayed behind on the stage long after everyone left. The bright lights had dimmed now, leaving only a soft glow around the piano. He sat on the bench where Clara had been sitting just an hour ago and placed his fingers on the same keys she had touched. He pressed one note and let the sound fade. It felt strange to him, how someone who had never trained could play with such feeling. He had met hundreds of students, performers, and teachers, but very few played with that kind of honesty. He leaned back, remembering the expression on her face while she played. There had been no showmanship, no attempt to impress anyone. She had been lost in the music completely, unaware of the crowd or the lights. That kind of focus came only from love, not from ambition. It made him wonder how many people like her existed, people with hidden talent that the world never saw because no one gave them a chance. Meanwhile, Clara quietly finished cleaning the dressing rooms. The sound of footsteps had faded from the corridors and the hall was almost empty now. She worked slowly, still thinking about what had happened. It all felt like a dream. She hadn't planned to walk onto that stage. She just couldn't stop herself when she heard Ethan's joke. Something deep inside her had whispered, "Go." And before she knew it, she was there. As she wiped the floor near the stage, she noticed Ethan still sitting by the piano. She hesitated for a moment, wondering if she should speak, but then decided against it. He was a world-famous artist. She was just someone who cleaned up after concerts. What could she possibly say? She quietly turned away, hoping to leave without being noticed. But Ethan looked up and said softly, "You play beautifully." Clara froze. She turned around slowly. "Oh, I'm sorry, sir. I didn't mean to interrupt you." "You didn't," he said with a kind smile. "I should be thanking you. You gave everyone here something to remember tonight." Her cheeks turned red. "I didn't mean to make a scene. You just said anyone could try, and I thought, maybe I could play a little. I didn't expect people to react that way." Ethan stood and walked closer, curious. "Where did you learn to play like that?" She looked down at her hands, still rough from years of cleaning. "I never learned, really. My father had an old piano when I was a child. It was broken, a few keys didn't even work. But I used to sit and play whatever came to mind. I couldn't read music, so I just played what I felt." Ethan nodded slowly, listening carefully. "You have something rare," he said after a moment. "You play from your heart. Most trained pianists spend years trying to sound that natural." Clara smiled shyly. "Thank you. That means a lot coming from you." He looked at her for a long moment, still surprised by how humble she seemed. There was no pride in her voice, no excitement about what had happened. Just quiet honesty. It made him feel a little ashamed of his own arrogance earlier. What had been a joke to him had turned into something much deeper. "I hope you don't mind me asking," he said gently, "but have you ever thought about playing seriously, professionally?" She laughed softly. "No, sir. I don't have time for that. I work here 6 days a week, and I don't even own a piano." That answer struck him. A woman with so much raw talent, and yet she didn't even have a piano of her own. He wanted to say something encouraging, but the words didn't come. He just nodded and said, "Well, thank you for sharing your gift tonight. You reminded me why I started playing in the first place." She gave a small nod and went back to her work, leaving Ethan standing there with more questions than answers. The next morning, news about the strange event spread quickly. A few people who had filmed the concert uploaded short clips online. The video showed Clara sitting at the piano in her uniform, playing a melody that made the crowd silent. Within hours, the clip began to circulate on social media. Comments poured in from people all over, asking who she was and how she could play like that. By afternoon, journalists started calling the concert hall, asking for details. The staff were shocked by the attention. One of them told the reporters, "She's just a cleaner here. None of us knew she could play." When Clara came in for her shift that evening, people were already whispering. Some of the younger staff greeted her with wide smiles, saying, "You're famous now." She didn't know what to say. She hadn't even seen the video yet. To her, it had been a simple moment of expression, nothing more. As she swept the floor, the manager approached her and said, "Clara, the pianist from last night wants to see you again." "He's in the main hall." She looked up, startled. "Me? Why?" He didn't say. Just asked if you could come for a moment. She nodded and set her broom aside. When she entered the hall, Ethan was already at the piano, practicing softly. The sound filled the empty room like sunlight. He looked up as she entered and smiled. "I see you've become quite the celebrity overnight," he said kindly. Clara shook her head quickly. "Oh, please don't say that. I don't even know how people found out." He laughed lightly. "Someone filmed it. It's everywhere now. People are touched by your playing." She frowned slightly, a little embarrassed. "I didn't mean for that to happen. I just played because I love the piano." "That's exactly why it moved everyone," Ethan said. "Because you played honestly. You weren't trying to impress anyone." There was a short silence between them. Then Ethan asked, "Would you like to play again?" "The hall is empty now. No audience, no lights, just the piano." She hesitated. "Are you sure?" he nodded. "I'm sure." Slowly, Clara sat down again. Her fingers trembled slightly at first, but once she touched the keys, she relaxed. This time her melody was different, gentle, almost like a whisper. The notes drifted softly across the room, wrapping it in calm. Ethan stood behind her, listening closely, almost forgetting to breathe. When she finished, he said quietly, "That was even more beautiful than last night." Clara smiled, though her eyes were a little misty. I used to play for my mother when she was sick. She said it made her forget her pain for a while. Maybe that's why I play the way I do. Ethan felt a lump in his throat. It all made sense now. The emotion in her music came from real memories, not from theory or technique. Clara, he said softly, I don't think what happened last night was an accident. You have something special, and I'd like to help you. If you'd allow me, I can arrange some lessons, maybe help you record a piece. People should hear you. She looked surprised, even frightened. Oh, no, sir, I can't. I don't belong on a stage. I'm just a worker here. He shook his head. No, you're more than that. You proved it yourself. She was quiet for a moment, then said softly, It was just one song. Ethan smiled. Sometimes one song is enough to change everything. Clara didn't answer, but something in her heart shifted that day. She still couldn't imagine herself performing again, yet part of her wondered what it would be like if she did. Later that night, after she finished cleaning, she sat alone on the piano bench again. The hall was empty, and the only light came from a single lamp above the stage. She played the same melody once more, slower this time, her eyes closed. She didn't know if anyone would ever listen to her again. She just wanted to feel that peace once more. And somewhere in the quiet darkness of the hall, Ethan stood near the back listening silently. He didn't interrupt her. He just smiled to himself, realizing he had witnessed something pure and rare. Music born not from fame or ambition, but from the simplest and truest part of a human heart. The next few days were unlike anything Clara had ever experienced. The video of her playing had spread far beyond her small town. It was shared on music pages, news websites, and social media. People from different countries commented, asking who she was and where she had learned to play like that. Some called her the woman with the golden touch. Others said they hadn't felt that kind of emotion in music for a long time. But Clara didn't even own a smartphone. She didn't know what going viral really meant. She just went to work as usual, arriving early in the morning with her cleaning supplies, sweeping the floor, dusting the chairs, and checking the lights. To her, the concert hall still felt like the same quiet place it always had been. She had no idea that outside people were already talking about her story, as if it was something magical. Ethan, on the other hand, was receiving calls from reporters, music schools, and even concert organizers. Everyone wanted to know more about the mysterious woman who had played so beautifully. When he told them she was the hall's cleaner, no one could believe it. Some even thought he was joking, but Ethan wasn't laughing anymore. He was deeply moved by what he had witnessed, and the more he thought about it, the more he realized how much her music had affected him. One afternoon, Ethan called the concert hall manager and asked if he could meet Clara again. When she arrived for her shift, she was surprised to see him waiting near the stage. He smiled warmly. I hope you're not tired of seeing me here, he said. She laughed lightly. Not at all. This is your piano, after all. I'm just passing through. He gestured toward the stage. Actually, I was hoping you'd sit there again. Clara frowned a little. I can't do that while I'm working. He smiled. Then consider this a break. Please, just a few minutes. After a short pause, she agreed. She placed her cloth and bucket to the side and walked toward the piano. Sitting down, she let her fingers rest on the keys for a moment. Ethan stood nearby watching quietly. When she began to play, the first notes drifted through the empty hall like a soft wind. Her melody was gentle, slow, and filled with emotion. It wasn't the same piece she had played before. It was something new, something she seemed to create on the spot. Ethan closed his eyes as he listened. Every note felt like a story, as if her heart was speaking through her hands. When she finished, the silence in the room was heavy but peaceful. Ethan opened his eyes and said softly, That was incredible. Clara smiled shyly. It's just something I remembered from years ago. He shook his head. No, that wasn't memory. That was feeling. She looked down at her hands, embarrassed by the compliment. I don't really understand music the way you do. I just play what sounds right to me. That's exactly what makes it special, he said gently. You play without rules. Most of us spend our lives trying to remember every note perfectly, but you just let the music happen. Clara looked thoughtful. When I was a child, my father used to say the piano has its own heart. Maybe I just try to listen to it. Ethan smiled. He was right. For a while, they sat in silence. Then he said, I've been thinking. Would you consider performing again? Maybe at a small charity event? Just one song, Clara froze. Oh no, I can't do that again. Last time I didn't even know what I was doing. I just played. But in front of people like you, it feels too big. He shook his head gently. Don't think of them as people watching. Just think of it as sharing something beautiful. You have a gift, Clara, and gifts are meant to be shared. She was quiet for a moment. I'm not ready for all that. I wouldn't even know what to wear, what to say, or how to start. Ethan laughed softly. Don't worry about that. Just be yourself. Her eyes softened. I'll think about it. The next week passed quietly. Clara continued her job, though she noticed more and more people whispering when she entered the hall. Some staff members treated her with a new kind of respect. Others looked at her with curiosity. It felt strange, almost uncomfortable. She had always preferred to blend into the background, but now she was becoming a story people couldn't stop talking about. One evening, while she was wiping the piano after rehearsals, a group of young students came in. They were from the local music school, carrying notebooks and sheet music. One of them recognized her immediately. You're the lady from the video, he said excitedly. Clara looked startled. Oh, I'm sorry, I was just cleaning. You can go ahead and practice, but the students didn't move. Could you play something for us? One of them asked eagerly. Please, just a little. Clara hesitated. I shouldn't, I'm working. The boy grinned. Just one song. We've all seen the video, it was amazing. She sighed softly, unsure what to do. Finally, she smiled and said, All right, but only for a minute. She sat down again, touched the keys, and began to play a soft tune. It wasn't long or complicated, just a simple melody filled with warmth. The students stood around her in silence, their eyes wide, completely lost in the sound. When she finished, they applauded like children who had seen something magical. See? One of them said. You're amazing. You should perform again. Clara laughed shyly. Maybe one day. When Ethan heard about this later, he smiled to himself. She's already inspiring people without even trying, he told the hall manager. Soon, word spread that the concert hall was planning a small charity event for local schools. Ethan suggested that Clara should play one song during the evening. At first, she refused, saying she wasn't ready. But Ethan didn't push her. Instead, he simply said, I'll keep the seat open for you. If you decide to come, it will be waiting. For days, Clara couldn't stop thinking about it. Each night after everyone left, she would sit by the piano and play quietly in the empty hall. She didn't tell anyone, not even Ethan. She wasn't sure if she wanted to be brave or just stay hidden. But deep inside, a small voice kept whispering that maybe this was her time to be heard. When the night of the event came, the hall was filled again. It wasn't as grand as the earlier concert, but still full of people, families, children, and local residents. Ethan was performing as the main artist. At one point during the evening, he stood up and smiled at the audience. Before we continue, he said, I'd like to invite someone very special to the stage. People started murmuring, wondering who it was. Then Ethan said, You might remember her from a moment that touched all our hearts. She doesn't know I'm saying this, but I believe she belongs here tonight. Backstage, Clara froze. She hadn't planned to go on stage, but Ethan looked toward her from the piano and gave a small nod. The crowd started clapping softly, encouraging her. Her heart pounded. Every part of her wanted to run away, but something else, something stronger, told her to walk forward. She stepped onto the stage, her steps slow and unsure. The audience cheered softly as she sat down at the piano. The lights were bright again, just like before. Ethan stood nearby, giving her a reassuring smile. Clara took a deep breath and began to play. The moment her fingers touched the keys, everything else disappeared. The sound filled the hall, soft and rich, flowing like water. She played a melody that came straight from her memories, half sadness, half hope. The audience went silent, completely drawn into her world. Every note told a story, every pause carried meaning. Ethan watched her from the side, his heart full. He realized that this woman, who had once been invisible to everyone, now held the entire room in the palm of her hand. When Clara finished, the silence that followed was almost sacred. Then the applause began, loud, emotional, unstoppable. People stood on their feet, clapping and cheering. Some had tears in their eyes. Clara looked around, almost overwhelmed. She hadn't expected such a reaction. She stood up slowly, her hands trembling, and gave a small bow. Ethan stepped forward and whispered to her, You did it. She smiled through her tears. I just played what I felt. That's what makes it perfect, he said. That night, something changed for both of them. For Clara, it was the moment she realized that her music could touch others, not just herself. And for Ethan, it was the moment he understood that true art wasn't about fame or perfection. It was about honesty, about the heart behind every note. As the lights dimmed and the crowd slowly left, Clara looked at the piano once more. She gently touched the keys as if saying thank you. She didn't know what the future would bring, but for the first time in her life she believed she might actually belong on that stage. After the charity event, the town seemed to be talking about nothing else. People who had attended couldn't stop telling others about the woman who had played so beautifully. The story spread again, and this time, it wasn't just about surprise, it was about admiration. Everyone wanted to know who she really was, where she came from, and how she had learned to play the piano without any formal training. Clara didn't understand all the attention. She still came to work at the concert hall every morning, sweeping the floors and polishing the brass railings. The only thing that felt different was how people looked at her now. The same coworkers who used to walk past her without a word now stopped to greet her warmly. Some brought her coffee, others asked her to play again. She appreciated their kindness, but part of her still felt shy about all the praise. Fame wasn't something she had ever wanted. She only loved the piano because it reminded her of peace, of memories she carried deep inside, memories that few people knew about. One quiet afternoon, Ethan found her sitting in the corner of the hall cleaning a row of seats. He smiled as he approached. "You've become quite the star," he said softly. Clara laughed. "Please don't say that. I'm just doing my job." He sat on the edge of the stage. "You know, people from the music academy called me. They want to meet you. They saw your performance online." She stopped wiping for a moment and looked at him surprised. "Meet me? What for?" "They think you have a rare talent. They'd like to offer you a chance to learn, maybe even train professionally." Clara shook her head quickly. "Oh no, I couldn't. I'm too old for that, and I don't belong in a place like that." "Those people are real musicians." Ethan smiled kindly. "So are you." She lowered her eyes. "You don't understand. I never studied. I can't even read sheet music." He looked thoughtful for a moment. "Then tell me, how did you learn? How did you play like that without ever being taught?" Clara paused, her eyes distant as if she were looking into a memory. "It started when I was a little girl," she said softly. "My father worked at a small restaurant that had a broken piano in the corner. It barely played, but to me it was the most beautiful thing in the world. I used to sit on a stool and press the working keys, listening to the sounds they made. My father saw how much I loved it, so he taught me to play by ear. He wasn't a trained musician either, he just knew a few songs. But he always said, 'Music is a feeling, not a lesson.' I believed him." She smiled faintly. "After he passed away, the piano was sold. I never had another one. But I always remembered the sound. Sometimes when I was alone, I'd imagine the music in my head. It was the only way I could feel close to him." Ethan listened quietly, his heart heavy with emotion. He realized that every note she played that night came from those memories, from love, loss, and longing. It wasn't just talent. It was a lifetime of silent emotion finally finding its voice. "Clara," he said softly, "your father would be proud of you." She smiled sadly. "I hope so. I still play for him in my heart." For a while, neither of them spoke. The only sound was the echo of footsteps in the distance and the faint hum of the lights. Then Ethan said, "Would you let me share your story? People should know the truth about where your music comes from. It might inspire others who feel like they don't belong." Clara thought for a long moment. "I'm not sure my story matters that much," she said quietly. "But if it can make someone feel less alone, then yes, you can share it." The following week, Ethan wrote a short article for a music magazine. It wasn't filled with fancy words or dramatic claims. He simply told the truth. How a humble cleaner had touched hearts with her pure emotional playing. How she had learned through love and loss, not through lessons or fame. The article was titled "The Music of the Heart." When it was published, readers everywhere were moved. They sent letters and emails, saying how her story gave them hope. Some said they had stopped believing in their dreams until they read about her. Others said her story reminded them of their parents or childhoods. Clara began receiving invitations from schools and small local events, asking her to play or speak about her journey. She never accepted money for it. She always said, "I just want to share what was given to me." But behind the growing admiration, something else was happening. Not everyone believed her story. A few people online claimed it was too good to be true. Some said it was a publicity stunt created by Ethan to gain attention. Others doubted that someone without training could play so beautifully. When Ethan told her about this, she didn't seem upset. She simply said, "People believe what they want to believe. I don't play to prove anything. I just play because I love it." Her calmness surprised him again. Most people would have argued or tried to defend themselves, but she simply let it go. That humility made him respect her even more. A few days later, Ethan invited her to visit his home studio. It was a quiet place filled with instruments, shelves of sheet music, and a large grand piano that seemed to glow under the soft light. He gestured toward it. "Would you like to record something?" "Just for yourself," Clara hesitated. "I don't know how to record." He laughed gently. "You don't have to, just play. I'll take care of the rest." She sat down, nervous at first, but once her fingers touched the keys, she forgot everything around her. Ethan recorded silently as she played a melody that was both haunting and peaceful. It was the same piece she had once played in the empty hall, the one that had moved even the young students to silence. When she finished, Ethan said quietly, This needs to be shared with the world." She shook her head. "No, please. I played that for my father." "I understand," he said. "But you should know something. When people hear this, they'll feel what you felt." "That's the power of real music." She didn't answer. She only smiled, as if unsure whether to believe him. Later that week, Ethan received a call from a national television network. They had read his article and wanted to feature Clara's story in a short documentary. He told Clara about it carefully, expecting her to refuse. But to his surprise, she agreed. "If it helps someone remember that their dreams are never too small," she said, "then yes, I'll do it." When the documentary aired, people across the country watched in silence. They saw her old photos, the hall where she worked, and the moments when she played the piano, her eyes closed, lost in the sound. The story touched millions. Messages poured in from strangers saying they cried, smiled, and felt inspired. One letter stood out to her. It came from a young girl who wrote, "I wanted to quit piano because I thought I wasn't good enough. But after seeing you, I realized it's okay to play from my heart, not just from the book." Clara read the letter several times, her eyes wet. She whispered to herself, maybe that's why all this happened, to remind someone not to give up. Despite the growing fame, Clara's life didn't change much. She still came to the concert hall every day, still cleaned, still greeted everyone with the same gentle smile. When people asked why she didn't quit her job now that she was famous, she always gave the same answer. "This place gave me my chance." I'll never forget that. Ethan admired her deeply. She reminded him of something he had lost long ago, the simple joy of playing for love, not for praise. In every interview he gave after that, he mentioned her name, saying, "She taught me that real music doesn't come from the hands, it comes from the heart." Clara's story became a quiet legend in their town. Visitors often asked which piano she had played on, and the hall began keeping it polished and well cared for, as if it were a treasure. Sometimes, when the hall was empty, Clara would sit and play again softly for no one but herself. In those moments, she wasn't a cleaner or a performer or someone known on the internet. She was just a woman remembering her father, letting her heart speak through every note. And though she never sought fame, her story became a symbol of hope, a reminder that true beauty can come from the simplest places, and that sometimes greatness hides in ordinary hearts. Months passed since Clara's story had spread across the country. People still remembered her name, but she never changed her way of living. Every morning she arrived at the concert hall before sunrise, carrying her small bag and thermos of tea. She swept the marble floors, polished the railings, and arranged the chairs with the same quiet care she always had. Fame had never touched her heart. What did change, though, was how others treated her. The musicians who once walked past her without notice now stopped to greet her. Visitors often came just to see her. Some even asked for a photograph, though she always smiled shyly and said, "Oh, I'm not anyone special." But one person noticed something others didn't: Ethan. He could see that even though she smiled, there was still a sadness in her eyes. One afternoon, after everyone had gone, he found her sitting at the grand piano, her hands resting quietly on the keys. He asked softly, You don't play much anymore, do you? She smiled faintly. Only when no one's around. The hall feels different now. Too many eyes watching. Ethan understood. The attention that had once lifted her was now making her hesitant. She missed the peace of anonymity. He said gently, You know, Clara, music doesn't belong to fame. It belongs to you. You should never stop because of others, she nodded, but her eyes drifted away. Sometimes I wonder if all this was supposed to happen. Maybe I was meant to stay quiet. Maybe the music was just for me and my father. Ethan thought for a moment, then said, Maybe it was for everyone who needed it too. That night, she went home and sat by the small window of her apartment, looking out at the city lights. The air was cold, and the faint sound of street musicians floated up from below. She closed her eyes and imagined her father sitting beside her again, smiling. Play from your heart, Clara, she heard his voice say. That's where your truth is. Tears filled her eyes. She whispered, I miss you, Papa. Then she softly began humming the tune she used to play as a child, the same melody she had played at the charity event. It still had the same magic even without a piano. The next morning, as she arrived at the hall, she noticed a poster outside. It read, National Talent Festival for all ages and backgrounds. No formal training required. She stood there for a long moment. Something about it caught her heart. Maybe this was a sign. Maybe she should share her music once more, not for fame, but to honor her father. Ethan noticed her looking at the poster later that day. Thinking of joining? He asked with a teasing smile. She laughed softly. Oh no, that's for real musicians, he shook his head. It says right there, no formal training required. If anyone fits that, it's you, she hesitated. I wouldn't know what to play. Play what you always do, he said simply. Play from your heart. After a few days of thinking, Clara decided to register. She didn't tell many people, not because she wanted to hide it, but because she didn't want expectations. She just wanted to play again freely, as she had done that first night. The competition day arrived in a large theater in the city. Hundreds of people came to watch. There were professional players, students, and even older adults rediscovering their love for music. Clara sat backstage, her hands trembling slightly. The noise, the lights, the smell of polished instruments, it all felt too grand for her. Ethan had come to support her, standing quietly in the crowd. When she looked nervous, he gave her a reassuring nod. When her name was called, she walked onto the stage slowly, her shoes clicking softly against the floor. The lights were bright, almost blinding. She sat down at the piano and closed her eyes for a moment, blocking out everything, the crowd, the judges, even the fear. She whispered softly to herself, This is for you, Papa. Then she began to play. The melody started quietly, almost like a whisper. Each note carried emotion, tenderness, and honesty. The room fell completely silent. People leaned forward, drawn by something they couldn't explain. It wasn't a perfect technical performance. Some notes were slightly uneven, some pauses longer than expected, but every sound felt real. By the time she finished, many people had tears in their eyes. The hall erupted in applause. She stood, gave a small, humble bow, and quietly left the stage. Backstage, one of the young contestants approached her with admiration. How did you do that? You didn't even have sheet music. Clara smiled softly. I just played what I felt. When the judges announced the results later that evening, Clara didn't win first place. She didn't even make it into the top 3. But something remarkable happened. The audience gave her a standing ovation when her name was mentioned. The judges themselves came forward and thanked her personally. One of them, an older woman, said, You reminded us why music exists, to touch the soul, not just to impress. Ethan met her outside after the event. He said proudly, You didn't need a trophy. You already won every heart in that room. Clara laughed softly. I guess that's enough for me. Over the next few weeks, more people reached out. Some invited her to small concerts. Others wanted her to teach beginners. For the first time in her life, she started giving lessons to children who couldn't afford expensive teachers. She didn't charge them. Instead, she said, You can pay me by practicing with love. Her little apartment slowly became a place of music and laughter. The children came after school, and she would teach them simple songs, encouraging them to feel each note instead of just memorizing. Ethan often visited, bringing snacks or recording her classes for fun. One day while filming, he said, You've created something beautiful here, Clara. This is more than music, it's kindness and sound. She smiled. Maybe that's what my father wanted all along. But amidst the joy, life had one more surprise waiting for her. One morning, Clara received a letter in the mail. It was from a famous conservatory in the capital city. They had seen her performance at the festival and wanted to invite her to perform as a guest artist in their annual gala, a concert attended by top musicians from around the world. Clara was stunned. She read the letter several times, not believing her eyes. When Ethan saw it, he was overjoyed. "Clara, this is incredible. You have to go." But she looked uncertain. "That's too big for me. I don't belong on such a stage." He placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. "You said that before, remember? But every time you play, you belong exactly where you are." She looked down, smiling shyly. "All right," she said quietly. "I'll do it, for him and for everyone who believed." When the night of the gala came, the grand concert hall was filled with musicians, critics, and dignitaries. The stage shone with golden light. Clara, wearing a simple white dress, walked slowly to the piano. The audience expected a practiced, rehearsed performance, but Clara began with something entirely different. She spoke softly into the microphone. "I'm not trained like most of you. I learned from love and memory. I play not to impress, but to share what I feel." Then she played the same melody she had played at the charity event, the one that started everything. But this time it was deeper, more emotional, carrying years of gratitude, struggle, and peace. When she finished, there was silence for a moment, then thunderous applause. People stood cheering and crying at the same time. The host walked onto the stage, shaking her hand, and said, "Tonight you reminded us what true art is." Backstage, Ethan hugged her with pride. "You did it, Clara. You've given the world your heart." She smiled, her eyes glistening. "No," she said softly, "I just gave it back. The world gave it to me first." From that day on, Clara's name became a symbol of pure talent and humility. She continued teaching children, playing for the elderly, and performing occasionally, not for fame, but for joy. And every time she sat at a piano, she imagined her father beside her, nodding proudly. The world saw her as a miracle, but to her she was still just a daughter keeping her father's promise alive. She never chased success, yet it found her. She never sought love, yet it surrounded her. And in the quiet rhythm of every note she played, there lived a story of patience, hope, and the power of simple, honest dreams. Years passed since that unforgettable night when Clara performed at the Grand Gala. The world had changed around her, yet she remained the same humble woman who once swept floors in a quiet concert hall. Her story had become known far and wide, not as a tale of fame, but as one of heart, perseverance, and the quiet beauty of following one's truth. People often came from different cities just to meet her, to hear her play, or to learn from her. But Clara never saw herself as a teacher or a celebrity. She always said, "I'm just sharing what I was given. Music belongs to everyone." Her small apartment had slowly turned into a lively place filled with laughter, old instruments, and children's voices. Some of her first students had grown up now. They visited often, bringing flowers or helping her with chores. Every time they came, she would smile proudly and say, "Look at you, you've become better than me." But deep down, she knew they had learned more than music. They had learned patience, kindness, and the power of believing in simple things. Ethan still visited often, though life had become busy for him too. He had received offers from bigger organizations and music magazines, but he always made time for Clara. She was no longer just a story he had written about. She was his friend, his reminder of what truly mattered. One evening, he came to see her carrying an envelope. She was sitting by the window, looking out at the setting sun, her old piano beside her. "I have something for you," he said, placing the envelope on the table. She looked at it curiously. "What is it this time?" he smiled. "A letter from the International Music Association. They want to honor you with a Lifetime Achievement Award for inspiring artists around the world." Clara stared at the letter in disbelief. "That can't be right," she said softly. "I've never even had a lesson in my life." "That's exactly why it's right," Ethan said. "You reminded people what real art is, something that comes from the heart, not the mind." She looked down, touched by his words. "I don't deserve such things," she said gently. He smiled warmly. "You've said that since the day I met you. Maybe it's time you start believing it. The award ceremony was held in the same concert hall where everything had begun. It was the first time Clara stood on that stage not as a cleaner, but as an honored guest. The crowd rose to their feet, clapping as she walked slowly toward the microphone. Her voice trembled slightly when she spoke. All my life I believed I was just an ordinary woman. I never imagined that one day people would listen to my story. I only played because it made me feel close to someone I loved. If my music has touched you in any way, then it means my father's dream is still alive. Thank you for letting me share it. The audience stood and applauded for a long time. Even the young musicians who once doubted her now looked at her with deep respect. It was a moment that felt like a full circle. The woman who once cleaned the hall was now being celebrated inside it. After the ceremony, Clara and Ethan sat together in the empty hall, the lights dimmed, the echoes of applause still hanging in the air. She smiled softly. "It's strange," she said. "When I first walked into this place, I used to think no one even saw me. And now everyone does. But what matters most hasn't changed. The piano, the sound, and the feeling it brings." Ethan nodded. "Maybe that's what makes you different. Fame didn't change you. You changed what fame means." Clara laughed lightly. "Maybe. But I still prefer being invisible sometimes." Life continued quietly after that. Clara returned to teaching and playing for her community. She often performed small concerts in hospitals, schools, and senior homes, saying, "Music heals more than words ever can." One cold winter morning, she woke up feeling weaker than usual. Her hands trembled slightly as she made her tea. The years of work and travel had taken their toll, but she never complained. That day, she still went to the music center where she taught, even though her students told her to rest. During class, one of the younger students asked, "Teacher, how do you make music sound alive?" Clara smiled softly and said, "Because I play what I feel, not what I know. That's the secret." The little girl looked thoughtful and then hugged her tightly. "I want to play like you one day." Clara's eyes grew misty. "You already can. Just don't stop believing." That evening, Ethan came to visit her. They sat together as usual, sharing tea and stories. He noticed her hands shaking slightly and said, "You should rest more." "You've given enough," she smiled gently. "No, Ethan, music doesn't take from me. It gives." He wanted to say more but stopped when he saw the peaceful expression on her face. She seemed content, as if she had already lived every dream she never dared to dream. In the days that followed, Clara's health continued to weaken. But she still insisted on visiting the hall whenever she could. She said she just wanted to sit near the piano, even if she couldn't play. The staff had long stopped treating her as a worker. To them, she was the heart of the place. One afternoon, as the sun cast a golden glow through the windows, Clara asked to be left alone for a while. She sat at the piano, her fingers resting gently on the keys. The hall was quiet, the air still. Slowly, she began to play one last time. A soft, tender melody that filled the room like a whisper. It was the same song she had played years ago. The one for her father. The one that had started it all. Her hands moved slowly, lovingly, as if each note carried a memory. And when the final chord faded, she sat still for a long while, smiling faintly. Later, when Ethan came looking for her, he found her sitting there, peaceful and calm, her hands resting on the piano. The faintest smile was still on her face. The hall remained silent for a long time. Outside, the wind blew gently through the trees, almost like a soft applause for a life beautifully lived. News of Clara's passing spread quietly, touching countless hearts around the world. Musicians, students, and ordinary people shared stories of how her music had changed them. Some said they learned to play again because of her. Others said her story reminded them that it's never too late to follow a dream. At her memorial, Ethan spoke with a heavy heart but a proud voice. "Clara taught us that greatness doesn't come from where you start, but from how deeply you love what you do. She showed us that humility and heart can echo louder than any applause." After the service, the concert hall decided to keep her piano exactly as she had left it. They placed a small plaque beside it that read, "In memory of Clara, the woman who played from her heart." Every year, on the anniversary of her first performance, the hall held a special event called the Heart of Music Night. Young artists would gather to perform not for prizes, but to play songs that meant something to them. No judges, no scores, none, only emotion. Ethan continued to write about her, publishing a book that told her full story. It became an inspiration for dreamers everywhere, and whenever someone asked him how he came across such a story, he would smile and say, by accident, or maybe by fate. Years later, one of Clara's students grew up to become a renowned pianist herself. During a concert in another city, she sat at the piano, closed her eyes, and played the same melody Clara once did. When the last note faded, she whispered into the microphone, "This is for my teacher, the woman who taught me to listen to my heart." The audience stood, clapping and crying, though many of them had never met Clara. But her spirit lived in every sound, every gentle rhythm, every person who believed again because of her. Ethan, sitting among the crowd that night, looked up at the stage and felt tears fill his eyes. He whispered quietly, "You did it, Clara. You've become timeless." And in that moment, it felt as if she were still there, not as a legend, not as a star, but as a simple woman whose music had reached across generations, because sometimes the most extraordinary stories come from the most ordinary hearts. And though Clara's voice had faded from the world, her melody continued, soft, eternal, and full of life, echoing through every heart that dared to dream again.